How did the Demon Hunters manage to surpass the popularity of the Titans, the Pirates, and even Hayao Miyazaki himself? Well, for Kimetsu no Yaiba to become a bullet train that never stopped running, a series of impossible requirements had to be met. To understand this phenomenon, we need to go back in time to exactly 2013. Under the pseudonym Koyoharu Gotug, a debuting author knocks on the door of Weekly Shonen Jump with a simple idea: hunters versus demons. He had no connections and no shocking style by the magazine's standards. What he did have was stubbornness. Gotug presents a one-shot dubbed Kagarigari that doesn't quite take off. Then another, and another one. The answer is repeated with slight variations. Good sense of rhythm, interesting world. The drawing needs polishing, but the end of the feedback was always the same. It's not what we need at this moment. The most logical course was to surrender, but Gotug, like his future star protagonist, was not willing to accept defeat. He continued drawing incessantly. Kagarigari eventually entered the Shueisha publishing house's new talent circuit and began to attract attention. Between 2014 and 2015, Gotug published 3 more stories: Monju Shiro Kyodai, Rokotsu-san, and Heiniwa no Zigzag. Years later, Shueisha would compile them in the anthology Koyoharu Gotug before Demon Slayer, but back then, nothing quite fit together. Editors and colleagues were asking for characters that would attract more attention and adapt to the new generations. And yes, guys, because unlike the anime I used to watch, characters like Goku or Naruto don't make as much sense today. Consumption is a reflection of society, and as such, the mainstream is rewarding broken anti-heroes. Characters like Denji from Chainsaw Man, Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul, or Eren from Attack on Titan. Guys who don't dream of saving the world, but of surviving in a world they consider cruel. Gotug took note, but did not deviate. He was not going to bow down to other protagonists. While other mangakas were looking for the effective hit, this anonymous author wanted his hero to connect with the public through his heart and for kindness to be his narrative force. Return to the basics of the rise of shonen as a genre. Publishers kept dismissing Gotug's vision until the only one willing to trust his talent appeared: his editor, Tatsuhiko Katayama. In a private meeting, Katayama asked him to work together on a simpler concept, something that any reader could immediately understand. For that, they returned to the spark of Kagarigari, swords and demons. Gotug put together a storyboard called Kisatsu no Nagare, but at every meeting they hit the same wall. The tone was too dark, and without a touch of comedy, they would never make it into serialization. Gotug took a deep breath and reviewed his biggest inspirations: JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Naruto, and Bleach. This is how Tanjiro was born, a demon hunter who stands out for his good heart, his strength, and his confidence in the face of adversity. Then he started adding concepts based on Japanese culture that he knew would attract a more Western audience. Among them, the setting in the Taisho era. With that formula, the anonymous author and his editor finally convinced Weekly Shonen Jump to give them a chance. But now, there would be no rest. After countless rejections and fears, the real problems would begin. Because success no longer depended on editors or private meetings, but on a fierce audience that could make or break any series in a matter of weeks. If you think success should come overnight, don't be scared by what you're about to hear. When Kimetsu no Yaiba started publishing in 2016, it wasn't the new boom in Shonen Jump. Success awards and world records were far from happening. In fact, the first volume sold just enough to avoid being cancelled. Every week they fought for a spot in a magazine where giants like One Piece, My Hero Academia, and Haikyuu competed. Gotug spent entire nights thinking about his story and trying not to take easy shortcuts. But for most readers it was just another manga, and it seemed like it could end at any moment. Still, there was one thing that sustained the work: the loyal audience, that tiny group of readers who, far from abandoning manga, began to recommend it. Little by little, word of mouth grew, in forums, in reviews, in conversations between fans. What was attractive was not the increasingly larger battles, but the figure of Tanjiro, a protagonist who did not fit the broken anti-hero mold that was in fashion, but rather won over with his kindness, his empathy, and the way he faced tragedy without losing his moral compass. In a sea of cynical heroes, Tanjiro was a breathing space that kept his own story alive. Suddenly, what had started out as a doomed manga became the magazine's hidden masterpiece. Sales began to soar, reaching the unthinkable. Kimetsu no Yaiba surpassed One Piece in popularity, the absolute king of Shonen Jump, and became the most recommended, most read, and most discussed title in Japan. This sounded like a rallying cry in the industry. Because when something starts to get attention, the real demons appear, the executives behind the animation studios. Koyoharu Gotuji's work was ready for something bigger, and the studio that realized this jumped at the chance. Founded in the early 2000s, Ufotable is an animation studio that had made its mark on projects like Hara no Kyokai and later Fate/Zero. His signature was recognizable, an obsessive digital style capable of integrating 2D and 3D and a color palette that seemed taken from a moving painting. But the reality behind that brand was more complex. The studio was coming from decisions that had not had the expected impact and was at risk of disappearing from the map. The funny thing is that Ufotable never worked as a common production company. Its founder, Hikaru Kondo, built an entire company with themed cafes, shops, and spaces where people could experience anime. It wasn't just about bringing manga to life. The guy had an obsession with building entire worlds around work. For Ufotable, every animation had to be more than just profitable. It had to be an experience, a piece of art worth admiring. When the Kimetsu no Yaiba rumor started to grow within Jump, Ufotable read it differently than the rest. While other studios saw manga as something profitable, but without a chance of competing with the giants. At Ufotable, they saw an open field to create an anime that lived up to the legends, one that transcends its time, that puts the genre on the world's radar, breaks records, and becomes unforgettable. And from that idea, there was no turning back. The animation house was obsessed with having that property, and Koyoharu Gotuji needed an ally willing to risk everything to transform vignettes into images that would make an impact. But at the same time, I was afraid that they would make the typical mistakes of other studios made, like those in Attack on Titan. Deadlines had to be respected, sequences wouldn't be released until they were ready, and no animator would be mistreated to achieve the expected result. The heart of his story was not going to be tainted by those production demons. With more doubts than certainties and an unstoppable thirst for success, the studio made the best offer and kept Kimetsu. It was time to leave everything behind so that this story could achieve immortality, although, of course, they never imagined the price they would have to pay. In the anime industry, there is an enemy worse than any fictional villain: the calendar. Masashi Kishimoto had to work on Naruto even during his father's funeral. Which studio gave up the millions that Attack on Titan generated because it couldn't make the deliveries? There are countless animators who have publicly denounced the MAPPA studio for labor exploitation to meet deadlines. Many a brilliant work has been tarnished by the ruthless machinery that is behind a successful production, and both Gotuji and Ufotable knew it very well. Determined not to repeat history, they devised a different plan. Produce ahead of time, stockpile finished animations before broadcast, and maintain a standard that seemed impossible for Japanese television. The team itself discussed it in internal meetings. Was it realistic to maintain a near feature-length level week after week? There was fear that uncontrollable ambition would lead to collapse. Koyoharu Gotuji was also part of those conversations. The anonymous author, who had fought for years to keep his manga alive in Jump, confessed that the idea of seeing Tanjiro animated generated both excitement and fear. What if the adaptation wasn't up to par? What if they turned their hero into just another product corrupted by commerce? Ufotable promised him the opposite: absolute respect for the work and an execution designed to excite rather than meet the schedule. The studio's bet was clear. If Kimetsu no Yaiba was to be remembered, each episode had to feel like a cinematic event. With that premise, the team was put together: Haruo Sotozaki in direction, Yuichi Terao in charge of digital photography direction, Akira Matsushima in character design, and the music duo Yuki Kajura and Go Shiina. It was a staff that had already demonstrated its talent in Fate Zero and Hara no Kyokai, and now had the mission of pouring all that obsession into a new project. The series premiered on April 6, 2019. From the first episode, the audience noticed the difference. The quality of the animation, the impossible camera movements, the cinematic atmosphere, and the impact grew with the first opening, Gurenge by Lisa, which swept through digital downloads. was certified with over 1 million sales and became the most popular anime theme of 2019. But the real earthquake came with episode 19, Hinokami. In that sequence, Tanjiro and Nezuko didn't just defeat a demon, they crossed the line between seasonal anime and a cultural milestone. The song Kamado Tanjiro no Uta, composed especially for the climax, exploded in downloads, and the episode trended worldwide. The recognitions were not long in coming. Kimetsu no Yaiba won Anime of the Year at the 2019 New Type Anime Awards, Animation of the Year at the 2020 Tokyo Anime Awards Festival, and was voted Best Series of the Year at the Crunchyroll Awards. While other animators struggled to meet schedules, Ufotable achieved the impossible, transforming Japanese television week after week, until an unexpected lawsuit rocked the studio. When everything seemed perfect, a crescent moon appeared, not from the pages of manga or the screen, but from the courts of Japan. In 2019, as anime exploded in popularity, the Tokyo Tax Bureau launched an investigation into Ufotable and its founder, Hikaru Kondo. The charges: tax evasion for concealing millions in income from themed cafes and official stores that the studio managed as part of its business universe. That commercial side, which demonstrated the extent to which Ufotable wanted the anime to be experienced as a total experience, suddenly became its biggest Achilles heel. The case was soon reported in the media. The headline spoke of more than 400 million yen in unpaid taxes. The notes detailed that this money was only what had been handled in cash, outside of the accounting records, but that there was surely much more. It was a double blow, not only economic but also moral, because Ufotable had built its reputation around artistic obsession of being a studio different from the rest, almost incorruptible in the eyes of the fans. The news fell like a bucket of cold water. The first rumors appeared on forums and social networks. Could Kimetsu no Yaiba continue in production if the studio was marked as evading? In Japan, where public outrage can be a final verdict, some speculated that the work would be halted or moved to another studio. In 2021, the Tokyo District Court found Hikaru Kondo guilty. The sentence was clear: 20 months of prison suspended for 3 years, plus payment of millionaire fines for evasion. In the eyes of the press, it was confirmation that the accusations had not been exaggerated. As headlines condemned Hikaru Kondo and rumors about the studio's future filled the forums, there was one voice that never appeared, that of Koyoharu Gotuge. The anonymous author of Kimetsu no Yaiba chose the most radical path amid the scandal, not saying a single word. There were no interviews, no press releases, not even a comment in the editorial spaces where he used to leave light messages for fans. Absolute silence. The fans noticed. There were those who criticized him for not speaking out, and there were those who defended this silence as an act of consistency. Gotuge had never wanted to be a celebrity, had never shown his face, and had never sought attention beyond his work. Furthermore, if the essence of her work was the kind heart of its protagonist, it would be useless to declare against or in favor of Kondo. In both cases, his work would be harmed. For many, this seemed to be the end of the phenomenon. Entire companies had disappeared for much less. Japanese industry and the public are unforgiving of scandals, especially when they involve millions of dollars. However, something unexpected happened. The audience did not let go of his hand. The news about the trial coexisted with another much more powerful reality. The Kimetsu fever was still intact. Fan forums and social media put it bluntly: it doesn't matter what happens to Ufotable. What matters is that the work continues. The fandom chose to look beyond the scandal and cling to Tanjiro's story. The message was clear. Ufotable had gone bankrupt. Its creator was closer to prison than the studio, and the image of everyone involved had been damaged. But Kimetsu no Yaiba no longer belonged to the studio or its creator. It belonged to the public. Neither judges nor fines could derail the approaching train. Amidst the legal scandal, anyone would have opted for prudence. Take a few years for the headlines and the audience to forget what happened. Recover the money, get organized with the team, and eventually continue with the second season on television. Ensure a loyal audience and allow the phenomenon to consolidate without risks. But Kimetsu no Yaiba was never a story that left things half-finished. In a closed room, with a few executives still standing, the future of the saga was being discussed. The most delicate decision was on the table. How to continue a success that had already exceeded all predictions? No one wanted to take the risk. Until someone raised their hand and came up with the idea that seemed impossible. What if we take it to the movies? No Jump Shonen had ever jumped directly from television to a film adapting a complete story arc. Typically, anime movies are fillers or spin-offs meant to entertain, not to set the official direction of the plot. But that was precisely what lit the spark. Kimetsu could break all the rules of the industry. Everything was forgiven, and besides, his animation was already at the level of a film production. It was a matter of adjusting some details and testing whether they could really fill a screening room. It would be more expensive, no one would sleep, and the pressure would make the animator sick. But if it went well, they could pay off the Japanese collection agency and make history forever. The chosen arch was the Infinity Train. It had everything: a fixed setting, a memorable villain, and Rengoku, a character who was destined to become a legend. It was the perfect material to test whether Kimetsu could be more than a television phenomenon. The result was a cultural earthquake. Released in October 2020, Kimetsu no Yaiba, Mugen Train, became the highest-grossing film in Japanese cinema history, surpassing Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away, a record that had been unbreakable for years. It grossed over $500 million worldwide, swept the box office even in the midst of a pandemic, and proved that an anime could compete head-to-head with Hollywood blockbusters. The move, which seemed crazy, became a legend. Mugen Train, saved Ufotable, confirmed that Kimetsu was the anime of the moment and fulfilled Koyoharu Gotoja's dream to achieve a historical phenomenon with an old-school character. That meeting, that raised hand in the room, forever changed the way animation is thought of in Japan. And if they had already achieved the impossible once, what was stopping them from doing it again? In May 2020, after 4 years of weekly publication, Kimetsu no Yaiba came to an end in the pages of Weekly Shonen Jump. With chapter 205 and a total of 23 volumes, the story of Tanjiro and Nezuko came to a close on paper, right at the highest point of popularity that any manga had reached in the decade. A work that had been born with doubts, that at first barely survived the Jump guillotine, now said goodbye as a phenomenon that had already surpassed 120 million copies in circulation. The closing was treated as a national event. Magazine covers, TV specials, farewell messages from other mangaka. All of Japan recognized that this manga was already part of history. For Koyoharu Gotoge, this closure was a relief. For the anonymous author, who had started with rejected one-shots and harsh reviews, simply making it to the final chapter was a personal triumph. He had achieved what thousands of aspirants never manage: to tell the story from beginning to end, without being cancelled. During all that time, he never showed his face or sought fame. Ufotable claims that she is a woman who hid her gender and her story so that her ideas would not be rejected in a magazine led by men. In the end, he chose to thank the readers and himself for remaining anonymous. All the scandals, criticism, and excessive success would have ruined his personal life. But now that his work was done, he could continue walking the streets of Japan without anyone knowing that he was the creator of the most profitable project in the history of his country. As Gotoge silently said goodbye, the situation in the studio was infinitely different. With their taxes paid and the Kimetsu story complete, they were drooling over everything that could be achieved. They were drunk with power, and what was coming was even more ambitious than everything that came before. After the acclaimed closing of the manga and the success that accompanied Mugen Train, the industry understood something that seemed impossible. An anime could mutate from TV to film and become one of the highest-grossing films in history. And then the inevitable question came: how to close Kimetsu no Yaiba? The most logical option was to continue on television. Now that they were saved, they could continue adapting the later arcs with the same formula that had worked before. But another rumor began to circulate in the halls of Ufotable. Within those walls, where the shadow of the tax scandal and industry pressures still lingered, someone dared to say what seemed crazy. What if we split it into 3 films? The plan is to divide the story of the Infinite Castle into 3 installments to be released over 6 years. The fans went crazy, and the move sounds as risky as it is monumental. On the one hand, the bet makes perfect sense. Cinema is the terrain where Ufotable was able to fully display its virtues. Fights choreographed like light shows, unforgettable sequences on a giant screen, and music designed to resonate in every seat. If there was an ending that cried out to become a film trilogy, it was this one. But there is also another reading, because beyond the love of art, it is undeniable that cinema offers something that neither television nor streaming can match: box office receipts. A ticket sold means much more than a play on platforms. When theaters fill up for every new release, the difference can be the difference between being the Netflix hit of the week and a money printing machine. And let's remember one thing: what Ufotable wanted above all else was to achieve an anime that would make history. Although it must be admitted that if they got rich along the way, it didn't bother them either. But Ufotable isn't the only one to have taken advantage of this strategy. After the success, the spin-off Jujutsu Kaisen Zero swept the box office, and Haikyuu announced that its finale will be told in 2 films instead of 1 TV season. Black Clover also made the jump to theaters to adapt a crucial part of the story. The decision to split the ending of Kimetsu no Yaiba into films isn't just a move within a franchise. It's a turning point for the industry. Taking years to animate a full arc and release it in theaters instead of TV was unthinkable and is now becoming the norm. Just imagine your favorite anime. Remember your moments of decline due to pressured deadlines or poor animation. And now, transfer it to this context. In the end, waiting a little can be worth it, right? But not everyone celebrates it. For many fans, waiting years between releases is frustrating and breaks the flow of the story. For others, it doesn't matter what the wait is if the end result is an unforgettable cinematic experience. That's the paradox. The same movement that drives records and prestige also creates anxiety and divisions in the audience. Let's stick to the facts. The first part of Infinity Castle was already released in Japan on July 18, 2025, and in less than 10 days, it surpassed 10 billion yen at the box office, more than $70 million, even faster than Mugen Train, which in its first weekend grossed 5.9 billion yen, and in just 25 days, accumulated 22 billion yen, entering directly into the top 5 highest-grossing films in the history of Japan, above Your Name and Titanic. Within a few months, it had become the highest-grossing film of 2025 in Japan, with over $150 million in its home country alone. And the incredible thing is that this time we don't have to wait years or risk the health of our computers to watch it outside of Japan, like we had to in our childhood. Infinity Castle is planning worldwide releases 2 months before its official launch, being the first anime to reach the IMAX format in some countries. What Ufotable is doing is insane. No matter what, one thing is clear from all of these conditions. Koiharu Gotoge's work was conceived to dare to think big, even bigger than what seemed possible. He didn't just break records, he changed the rules. And with Infinity Castle, it's no longer just a manga, an anime, or a movie. It's a phenomenon that looks set to transform the Japanese entertainment industry forever. For Kimetsu no Yaiba to become the most popular and successful anime today, impossible conditions had to be met. An unknown author who refused to give up, an audience that believed in the goodness of its hero, a studio willing to risk it all, and boundless ambition. It wasn't luck, nor was it a miracle. It was a combination of risky decisions, artistic obsession, perfect timing, and yes, also a hunger for success, from hunting the audience and the business, achieving an unstoppable train that surpassed all its rivals. The question is, what do you believe? Does Kimetsu no Yaiba deserve the recognition it's receiving? Will the plan of waiting so many years to see each movie work? I read them in the comments.